Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight. Today's guest is Louis Cammarosano. Louis was an attorney with international law firms. He represented corporations, Wall Street, City of London, international banks on initial public offerings, securities, derivative matters, and mergers and acquisitions. After his law career, Louis became the general manager of HomeGain, a major real estate portal. Louis is the creator and owner of smallgold.com. He also has his YouTube channel, Small Gold, and I am very happy to have him back on the X22 Report Spotlight. Louis, welcome back to the Spotlight.
Hey, Dave. Thanks for having me on again.
Hey, thanks for being here. And let's start off with the U.S. economy and what it's doing right now. And I wanted to get your take on the latest data. I mean, we're having housing data come out. We have the retail data coming out, and they're coming out with the GDP numbers. I wanted to get your take on how the economy is doing. Has anything really changed? Have they improved the economy? Is manufacturing getting better? Take us down the road of what the economy is doing right now. And is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Where are we?
You know, I look at the data as it comes out every week. There's about 4 or 5 data points they put out. It seems to be a bit of more of the same, although that GDP number was the first time it was over 3%. But I'm not seeing any real change, any dramatic change in either the officially produced inflation numbers, the unemployment numbers. You know, they go lower. The initial claims, they're low. They're at 30, 40 years low. You know, what's the other one that they count? The labor force participation rate. All of them seem to be about where they are. And it seems that the economy is based on, and we're still waiting for, this anticipation of what Trumpflation is going to be. We're going to get tax cuts. We're going to get infrastructure programs. But so far, we haven't had any of those. So I still see this as a carryover of the Obama economy because Congress has not passed any legislation or any intervention into the economy that would make things change. So it's all based on the one thing that hasn't changed is the stock market continues to go up despite no significant increase in earnings. And that's where Trump has focused his attention. He's adopted the stock market as his own. He used to call it a bubble. Now that the bubble's gotten bigger, it's his bubble and he wants to own it. So far, I think the first year of Trump hasn't really changed the economy in any significant form.
You mentioned a bubble in the stock market, and I know that Trump used to come out and say, you know, there's bubbles everywhere, there's bubbles in the stock market. Do you still see bubbles in the economy? Are they getting bigger? Are they shrinking? What do you see right now?
Well, the stock market has been in a bubble, you know, for 6, 7, 8 years. And one thing we have to be careful of, just because something's in a bubble doesn't mean it's going to pop or burst anytime soon. The thing with this bubble is that it is central bank created. So unlike a private Ponzi scheme, you always need to find new money and eventually it runs out. The debts have to be paid or you need more money to boost the whole Ponzi scheme. Well, here we know that the central banks have the capacity to buy each other's debt, to print money into the stock market like the Swiss National Bank does, like the Bank of Japan buys its own debt, as much of it as they want. So that's the issue, is that if the central banks can keep, in effect, running their own Ponzi scheme, it takes a lot longer for that to wind down because they all have an incentive to keep it going. Not just the incentive. I mean, Bernie Madoff had an incentive to keep it going. He just couldn't find any more money. The central banks don't have that problem. They can find more money. They can just print it.
Now, even though they can print the money or just, push a button and have it created, the real economy, I mean, think about this for a second. They're telling us the unemployment right now is at 4.2%. And they're telling us that continually is falling. But we see the tax receipts that are coming into the federal government, they are falling right now. We see retail stores, they are closing and people are losing their jobs. And corporations, their earnings, well, those are kind of manipulated because if we look at their revenue and sales, they're not doing as well as they are saying. Yes, they make it seem like they're doing much, much better than they really are. But the real economy, is it eventually going to separate from this statistical illusion?
It already has. That's the point. There's a facade economy. And what they do is they show you the numbers that indicate everything is fine. But everybody knows, and even their own numbers show, that real growth has not happened over the last 10 years. We've had stock market growth. We have not had a booming economy. This is the worst recovery ever, in a sense that, and they even had to change how GDP was calculated to get this positive GDP number. So the result of all this is that you do permanently restructure the economy so that there is no growth in the real economy. And they try to tell you we got to get used to this. But they show you here's the other benefits. We've got this booming stock market. We've got rising asset prices. But in effect, they've destroyed the economy. And that's why there's not this big collapse, because they keep doing it. And as they add more money into the system, it has little effect on the real economy, but a real effect on the stock market. And it just makes the economy worse and worse and worse. And China does the same thing. The way they get their GDP growth is they borrow money. In fact, they have a debt to GDP ratio of 300%. They have spent $4 in debt to produce $1 of GDP. And they do it at an even more extreme level. The reason they have the high GDP growth and the West doesn't is the West doesn't spend its debt on GDP growth as much as it does spending it on paying for entitlements. But what the Chinese do is they have, if you just Google or Bing or whatever you look at, or DuckDuckGo, ghost cities in China. China produces a lot of its GDP via just building bridges to nowhere, building these massive ghost cities that can fill 2 or 3 million people in, and no one goes in them. And then the banks lend the money for these projects, and the projects don't turn any return. So people claim that their bad debt is as high as 35%. But the official number in China is what, 5%. So it's the same thing. So they have an $8 trillion potential bad debt on their books. But the Chinese government does the same thing. They said, not to worry, it's just 5%. And then they do what we saw, we were outraged by the Federal Reserve, is they can just order the banks to lend more money or extend the terms. Well, that's kicking the can down the road too. So all across the world, the economy is not real, because in a real economy, you would not lend money without understanding the risks that this project needs to work. But if you know you can lend the money, they can build 10,000 apartments, you'll get paid for it. If the government backstops everything, that's how they're creating this facade of growth. China's doing it in a 3 or 4 times rate that the West is doing it, and the West is also doing it just to prop up the economy and just show a small amount of growth. But the whole world is doing this. China's a debt monster. All the countries are basing their entire economy on debt. If you think about what an asset is on the balance sheets of the central banks, what do they call an asset? U.S. treasuries, which are basically money that the U.S. owes that can't pay. So that's the issue, is the whole economy is debt-based.
Now, are the Chinese just using the U.S. dollar to build all these cities, and at the same time saying, okay, we know the dollar, is declining. We know eventually the dollar, maybe it won't exist anymore. And as we're doing this, we're going to use the dollars to build these cities, but we're also going to store gold to protect ourselves. Are they not worried because they're storing a huge amount of gold?
So China has, when we say China, we have to be careful. People's Bank of China is not where all the gold in China is. The People's Bank of China lists, as I was saying, 1,842 tons of gold, and that's about 59 million ounces, I think. And that's only worth $76 billion, or about half a month of QE. So 1,800 tons of gold is not going to protect China from anything. Now, some people say, there's more gold in China, and there is. There's gold at the subsidiary banks that are state-run. There's subsidiary banks of the People's Bank of China. There's sovereign wealth funds. And some people claim, there's 10, 15,000 tons of gold in China. And I wouldn't dispute that, because China has produced about 5,000 tons over the last 10 or so, 15, 20 years domestically. They've imported from Hong Kong about that same amount over the last 10 or 15 years. They import more through Shanghai. Now, some of that goes into private citizen hands. But the point being is that 1,800 tons at the current price is $76 billion. So let's say they have 10,000 tons of gold. At the current price, that's only $417 billion. That's not a lot of money or value to protect yourself. So they say, well, you can revalue the gold, but you can revalue that gold times 3 and get it to like 4,000 an ounce. And 10,000 tons at 4,000 an ounce is about $1.234 trillion. That's the same amount they have in treasuries. So the idea that these countries, Russia, China, are buying gold, adding gold to protect themselves at the current price, or even at the current amounts that they have, there's really very little protection. Now, Russia has, last I do, now Russia is different than China because the central bank of Russia reports every month now their gold reserves, and there's no thought that the government has gold elsewhere. They have reporting about 1,700 tons, which is about what China has, or People's Bank of China has. And again, that's about $75 million that they have, $75 billion that they have, and they have $103 billion in U.S. Treasuries. So those are assets, but they're not really, you really can't look at their gold reserves as rainy day funds because they're really not that large, even if you get a 3x price increase on the gold. So China and Russia do add, now People's Bank of China hasn't added gold officially to their reserves in over a year now. It's since last October when they officially joined the SDR, made a big deal about announcing their gold holdings prior to being admitted to the SDR. They were finally admitted to the SDR in 2015 with it taking effect on October 2016. And ever since then, they haven't reported adding a single ounce to their gold reserves. Now, that doesn't mean there's not more gold flowing into China. It's obvious that there is, that they're not mining more gold. It's obvious that there is, but they just, as an official bank, People's Bank of China hasn't added any. But my point is, even if you add in all that gold, you get them to 10,000 tons, current price, it's less than $500 billion.
Unless they're expecting the gold to go up a lot more. I mean, right now we know the gold price is regulated. I mean, so maybe they're expecting, when things all go to hell and stuff, they're expecting, a huge ramp up of the price of gold. And they're saying, okay, if we have this much and the price is at this point at that time, then we're fine.
Well, the way I would look at that is I would think, though, that any country who sees that coming, and it's not like China has any more great insight into what might be coming than any other country. I am just stunned that it seems that all the central banks have somewhat agreed not to add gold to their reserves because Germany made a big deal about getting their gold back from the Federal Reserve, but they haven't added any gold in 15, 20 years. In fact, Germany sells small amounts of gold every year for the production of coins, gold coins in that country. The Netherlands made a big deal out of repatriating, but they haven't added any. None of the central banks of the West have added any gold to their reserves. In fact, the only countries that are officially reporting adding gold in the last couple of years were China until they stopped reporting in October 2016. Russia, which has reported 205, maybe 6 tons in 2015, 199 last year. This year they're on pace for over 200. And then you got Kazakhstan, who adds about 100, 150,000 ounces a month. They actually have a 59-month streak, which they've added gold to their reserves. And then recently, Turkey has been buying back some of the gold that they sold last year. But one of the things they all have in common, China, Kazakhstan, and Russia, is they are gold producers. So they can actually turn their rubles into gold by buying their domestic production. That's exactly what Russia does. And then they sell some to China. And then China actually produces their 450, 500 tons a year. And then they import even more from other countries, including Russia.
Now, China, I mean, they're working on many different projects, and we know that they have a huge amount of debt, just like the United States, Europe. I mean, the global debt is just completely out of control. But they're pushing their new initiative, the Belt and Road, and they're getting a lot of countries to join on in this, to have trade, manufacturing. Are they turning towards that to think that, this will help their country, this will help the emerging markets, this will help Europe by having trade in this form and everything that they're doing, their cities that they're building? They do believe that maybe in time, these cities will be populated from all this trade that they're trying to push right now.
Right. So that's basically central planning. And you're basically saying that a communist country can centrally plan not only their own economy, but the entire region around them. And that's hubris, because you can see already when you build stuff and then you can't get a return on the investment, you've got bad debt. And then they say, well, we'll just print more money and we'll pay them back. Well, then you have a problem. See, I think a lot of people are focused on this concept that China is playing this long game and that they can understand and think 12 steps ahead. They're basically trying to keep the wheels on the car while they're going 100 miles an hour, maybe even try to change them and watch the car at the same time. And the fact that they have gold isn't going to stop China from actually imploding if they don't make all the right moves. Now, the thing about the Belt Road, that area, right now, most of those areas are not where China can derive its GDP, because a lot of those areas are economically insignificant. So right now, China has to be concerned first and foremost, at least in the short term and even medium term, with its largest trading partner, Europe, its second largest trading partner, the United States, Japan. And this is where their money is. They're planning ahead. They need to create the economic environment in all these other areas, and they have to put debt into that to see if they can actually make some production so that there's productive capacity there, and that somehow they'll get a return on investment. That project is not without risk. And I think people don't understand that, and that is, again, all debt driven.
So they
have 250 million people, Dave, that have moved from the country where they were self-sufficient barely, farmers, subsistence farmers, and now they're in these big cities. And then there's cities outside of the cities that are empty. And they have to make sure that they can keep these people fed, employed, entertained. So they don't really have a lot of leeway to be making even bolder moves than they already have. Because they have to. A Chinese communist country knows that their people could explode at any minute. That's what I think people don't understand, is that we always talk about here where you don't want to be in a crisis, if the dollar collapses. Well, what happens if the Chinese economy collapses? And you now have 250 million people in cities that hadn't been in cities 10 years ago.
So let's say the Chinese economy does collapse. I mean, the amount of money they spent, the amount of debt they have, and there's a credit implosion. I mean, what effect will this have around the world? Not just in China. What effect will this have around the world?
That's the point. So let's look at the reason that after 2008, China led the world out of the global depression. And how did they do it? They printed money. They borrowed money. They produced more goods. They built more stuff. So it's the exact opposite. If that goes away, yeah, you're going to have a big depression worldwide. Because if they were the driver of the global economy and they come to a crashing halt and actually go into a depression, they bring the world down with them. See, that's why this whole China is going to launch a gold-backed yuan and it's going to crush the dollar. That China cannot be focused on. That's one small thing that China has to worry about. They don't wake up in the morning and think we need to get more gold and we need to crush the dollar. Because if that's all they did, they would crush the whole economy. They'd crush themselves and they'd crush the world economy. So that's why I think that people need to look at the entire Chinese situation geopolitically, not just in terms of gold and the dollar. Because right now the yuan is, I think, 1% of global reserves. And sure, they want the yuan to be more accepted, more used. But remember, no country is going to want to hold yuan when you can't trust their numbers any more than you can trust the U.S., maybe even worse, when they have bad debt at 33% and they centrally plan everything. So it's not like the yuan is any type of currency that's going to also build confidence and dethrone the dollar. And I'm not saying that's because the United States has its house in order. It's just that China has come out of nowhere and we know how they did it. It may be a miracle, but it is a debt miracle. And you really want your currency, your reserves, to be held in Chinese yuan. And that leads us into this, they're going to convert it into gold for oil. First of all, that story has no source whatsoever. I've seen that story everywhere. And one of the things that disturbs me about that story is, and I don't want to get into the specifics of how it might work because I haven't seen anything that says that it has been announced, but I've seen so many stories on the Las Vegas shooters. The alternative media spent so much time on it, and it's a very valid issue to get into and look at. Was there two shooters? Was there one on the roof? Was there one on the ground? Was there one in this window? What are these flashes? these are all very valid concerns. Everybody has taken up in, audio forensics and so on. But when this gold-backed yuan story came out, and the story basically read, China is expected to launch shortly a crude futures oil contract priced in yuan, convertible into gold, no one questioned the story. They just said, sure, yeah, end of the dollar, game over, game changer. And I'm just concerned that I don't see any evidence that there is been any announcement of a gold-backed, gold-convertible yuan. All I've seen is, and I have seen the documents, that they are planning a yuan-denominated oil futures contract. But nothing I've seen has indicated that it'll be backed by gold or convertible by gold. And the reason I think that they wouldn't do that is, as some people have pointed out, that could be World War III. You don't just go to Saudi Arabia and say, hey, you've been taking dollars, petrodollar all this time. Well, forget that. Why don't you just take the yuan? If you don't like that, we'll somehow figure out how to get gold in your hands. Well, first of all, any oil producer who receives dollars today can go out and buy gold if they wanted to. So I'm not sure why China, acting as a gold broker with the risk of really pissing off the United States, makes a stitch of sense, because remember, they need to trade with the United States. And you got Donald Trump, who's threatening to call them a currency manipulator, slap tariffs on them. He's threatened to kick them out of the SWIFT system unless they complied with what he wanted on Korea. And they did comply. So I'm not quite sure that China is going to just thumb their nose in the United States' nose. I mean, put their thumb in the nose of the United States, other than perhaps deals that they have with Iran and Russia, because Russia and Iran are already out of the dollar system, and they're on sanctions. So sure, they'll do trade with them. But to make it sound like all oil producers, China's going to somehow come up with some arrangement to get gold in their hands, and that's not even an endorsement of the yuan. That's basically saying, you don't want yuan? We want the yuan to be a global currency, but I know you don't want it, so why don't you take gold? That defeats its own purpose. And then the way Jim Rickards described it, which was interesting, he said they'll get the gold, they'll buy the gold on the Shanghai Futures Exchange, and then they'll immediately sell it short on the Shanghai Futures Exchange. So if they do that, that's not a positive for the gold market, because that's a wash transaction. In any event, I just look at this whole gold-backed yuan story has gotten out of control. Everybody's talking about the impact, but no one's even thought about whether, one, it's true, or two, what the negative impacts are, not just on China, but on the rest of the world.
Well, didn't Venezuela come out and say that they were going to use the yuan for oil trade? Forget about the gold aspect of the yuan. I'm looking at the yuan for oil trade because, right now we have the dollar. The countries use the dollar for oil trade. And Venezuela came out and said we're going to be using the yuan instead of the dollar for oil trade, which, again, they're under sanctions. And a lot of countries that are under sanctions, they're moving towards their own currency, or maybe the yuan or the ruble or something different than the dollar to survive.
Oh, absolutely. It makes sense for Venezuela to do that. Now, I did notice, and no one picked up on this story either. I picked up on that Venezuela said, look, we're going to take yuan. And again, that fits in with China's official plans that we've seen to do a yuan-denominated oils contract. Nothing to do with gold, but let's leave that off to the side. But with Venezuela, if you remember, when they made that announcement, Trump was at the UN, and he made a big point of basically trashing Venezuela, trashing socialism, and basically saying that these are types of countries that we cannot allow to destroy their own populations, lack of democracy. Kind of sounded like the prelude to a war. The way he was talking was that we can't have this in our backyard. Now, coincidental that he's making all these noises about why this is a hostile regime after they said, we don't want to take the dollar, we want to take the yuan. But then the point that no one picked up on was everyone saw Trump trashing Venezuela and sounding pretty bellicose towards Venezuela. But Nikki Haley was asked in a briefing around the same time, the next day, I think, and she was talking about an oil embargo on Venezuela. So, an oil embargo, she didn't explain exactly what she meant by an oil embargo. That could just mean that the United States doesn't bring oil in from Venezuela. And I think Venezuela is not significant to the United States. I think they're third I think it's Canada, Saudi Arabia, the big oil importers into the U.S. Venezuela's third. Obviously, the United States can do without the third largest supply because they also have their own oil that they can swap out, the domestic production. But the fact that she used the word embargo, now if she meant embargo in that we're not going to allow them to export their oil, that's an act of war. Now she didn't say that, but of course, when you couple it with these types of idealistic things like, Venezuela has been a disaster for years. I'm sure everyone's reported on it, the very bad situation in Venezuela. And when have you ever heard Obama or Trump talk about, we got to do something about Venezuela? Never. Until they say, we're not going to take the dollar for yuan. So I think that is a flashpoint, and we'll see. I don't know if that has started yet already, where they're actually taking yuan. But I think that's valid. I think that that's one way that China can actually gain international currency for the yuan by accepting, saying, look, hey, we're the big shooter here. We want you to take our yuan if we're going to buy your oil. I mean, they're in the driver's seat. Now, I question whether they really want to do that, since they've got $1.2 trillion worth of treasuries they can dump to buy oil. But I can see they can hold off on that and say, we want to get the yuan internationalized, so we want to use it to buy oil. Putting the gold thing into it, I think, doesn't make any sense. But it definitely makes sense to tell Venezuela, look, you got no choice. You're going to take yuan. Venezuela made it sound like they were in the driver's seat, but really China is in the driver's seat because they're the largest consumer of oil. So they should be able to dictate some of the terms, and they really shouldn't have to be told, look, we're not going to take your yuan, but we want you to figure out how to get us gold.
Now, I wanted to shift into the crypto market for a couple of seconds here. And we had the head of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, come out and say, maybe Bitcoin, maybe the crypto markets, maybe, this is something that can be used in the future. She also went on to say that, if we went into the crypto markets, we wouldn't need banks. And there are certain banks and central banks around the world that are, trying to create their own cryptocurrency. And they're trying to, tell us that, they can stabilize everything and we wouldn't have to worry about the ups and downs of Bitcoin and all the other cryptocurrencies. What's your take on the crypto market? Are the central banks trying to control the crypto market?
Absolutely. I think a cryptocurrencies are a banker's dream, even more so than carbon credits. Because what banks like are things they can trade that come out of thin air. And if you noticed what Lloyd Blankfein said, I think he tweeted out something to the effect of, people were skeptical when paper money came out, to use instead of gold. Well, who benefited from that? Bankers, right? Because now they realize, oh, okay, if people are going to take these certificates instead of the gold, if we can convince them to do that, well, it's off to the races for us, because now we don't have to keep one-to-one. They'll never know about it. We can issue as many of these certificates as possible. And now you've got financialization of a commodity, and that's what banks like to do. So cryptocurrencies, I think what they want to do is, and never mind what Jamie Dimon says, because JP Morgan's involved in the Ethereum project on the board of directors. I think he's just trying to talk it down. But cryptocurrencies are something that banks can, if they can, for example, Fidelity Investment came out the other day and, they're mining Bitcoin and Ethereum. They have integrated the Coinbase platform onto the Fidelity platform. Now, Coinbase has about 11 million users. Fidelity has 71 million users. Well, Fidelity is thinking, we're losing trading dollars over here. This Coinbase, they have people trading something that we don't get a piece of. Goldman Sachs, they're not getting a piece of it. Jamie Dimon is saying, my private trader, my trader employees are making money and I'm not getting a piece of it. That's why he's mad. They're seeing an opportunity to get cryptocurrencies. Now, what's interesting with Christine Lagarde, I didn't just read her speech. I listened to the thing and I listened to what she said afterwards. And she was very positive about the potential for cryptocurrencies, but she was acting like they're not a problem yet because of the small size. And she's right. I mean, a lot of people that are into Bitcoin make it sound like Bitcoin's taking over the world. The market cap of Bitcoin and the number of people who trade Bitcoin really is infinitesimal compared to, the global payment system. But it is a threat to them, and they have realized it. But I think what they want to do is they want to integrate the cryptocurrencies into the payment system, the banking payment system. If you look at companies like 10X and others, they have these Visa cards where you can load in your cryptocurrencies. Well, then guess what? You spend your cryptocurrencies. How do you spend them? You spend them through Visa. Then they get their fees. So I think they've come to the realization that stopping cryptocurrencies is more trouble than it's worth. If they can regulate these things, put them on exchanges. Now, there are ways of trading off the exchange, and savvy people have pulled their cryptos off the exchanges. They put them in their hardware wallets. They're now doing atomic swaps. I wrote an article for Zero Hedge on that. But for the most part, if they could just shift mainstream America into buying these things through Fidelity, through Charles Schwab, they get a tax statement at the end of the year. They don't care. It's not even a threat to the dollar or to any currency, really, if they're all denominated in dollars and they're all taxed in dollars and they can trade in them and they can put them on exchanges. They can do ETFs. I think that's where they're thinking. And the other thing they want to do is regulate ICOs, because right now, Silicon Valley just missed out on a few $1 billion worth of ICOs that were neither underwritten by investment banks, they were not funded by Silicon Valley. Well, if you regulate these things, Silicon Valley comes in and says, meet my banker, we'll give you the cash, and now they do the ICO. So there's too much money involved in this ecosystem already for them to even try to stop it down. And what Lagarde said was, it may not be wise. I just pulled up my article here. It's called, what is it called? IMF head Lagarde touts Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. She says it may not be wise to dismiss virtual currencies. Virtual currencies may just give existing currencies and monetary policy a run for their money. And then she claimed, which is kind of ridiculous, that if these privately issued cryptocurrencies become popular, that people may demand that their central bank may, create a crypto of their own. So there is a bit of hubris still that they think they can create their own cryptocurrencies and they'll be just as widely accepted. And they may be. But I remember that the guy who runs the head of the Bundesbank in Germany, he was saying all we have to do is create a faster payment system, as if that's what the attraction of cryptocurrency is, and people will just forget about them. That was another article I had published in Zero Hedge, which was called something about the central bank's plans to stop Bitcoin. But Christine Lagarde is past that. She's basically saying that she didn't call them a fraud, and basically she was saying we need to be careful here because this is something that could have a positive impact on the world. So she thought that they wanted to look at them. And there was an interesting thing she said at the end of her speech, which wasn't in the text of her speech. And she said, I could have talked to you about cybersecurity, the challenges of hacking, financial terrorism, hiding places from taxes that are made available. Those are all the key things against cryptocurrencies. And those are the things you would expect the IMF and the central banks to just say, like Jamie Dimon, it's a fraud. She said, I believe we as individuals and communities have the capacity to shape the technological and economic future that works for all. So she's basically saying there's room for cryptocurrencies in this whole scheme here. And then she said, I want to pause for a second. We go around this is the globalist in her, beating our chest, reminding ourselves when globalization was up and rising and the story of the day. Then she wistfully says, we forgot a little bit about the fact it had to benefit all. In other words, globalization can't just be for us. So let's not try to make the same mistake again. And basically she says, and if we do, and if we don't use these technologies and allow them to develop, and we try to make them only work for us globalists, this is what she said, we might be sorry in 2015 that we did not remind ourselves of this imperative. So I think they realize that trying to stop the cryptocurrencies is a losing battle, and they believe they can co-opt them. I don't know if they can, but I think they can co-opt enough of it for it to be worth their while not to try to stop them. And I think China's going to do the same. I think they want to shut down the ICOs. They want to regulate them. They want to make sure that the trading exchanges have the Bitcoin and the Litecoin that they say they have, so that there's not a high profile collapse of one of those exchanges. I don't think they view them. I know that people that like Bitcoin think they're the crypto, they're the central bank killers. I actually think if the central banks do the way they want to, they can actually strengthen the fiat currencies by bringing the cryptos into the payment system.
So let me ask you this. I mean, we're talking about the crypto market. Now, the Fed, let's go with the Fed right now. They create the dollar out of thin air, and we have to pay taxes because they loan the money to the government. Cryptocurrency is not created by the Fed. It's not created by the IMF. It's not created by any central bank. So if people are trading in the cryptocurrency, let's say an employer says, you know what, I'm going to pay my employees with the cryptocurrency. Then those employees go ahead and they buy, items because maybe Amazon or some other place accept the cryptocurrency. Doesn't that leave the central bankers completely out of it? Doesn't that leave us to be free of their tax system because they didn't create it? There's nothing that says that we need to pay taxes on that.
Yes, there's a difference between central bank monetary policy and the too big to fail banks making money off of cryptocurrencies. That's absolutely correct. So if cryptocurrencies were the preferred and the most widely used of currencies, then central bank monetary policy would be almost impossible to implement. However, that's not the case. It's not even close.
No, I mean, right now it's very, very tiny. Right now, many people don't even know about the cryptocurrency market. I mean, it's so small. And that's why when people say it's in a bubble, there's just not enough people in it right now to really understand what it is. I mean, if I go to my neighbor, they might have heard of it, but they have no clue what it really is.
So the only way cryptocurrencies can become a threat to the central banks is massive widespread adoption and widespread trade in the cryptocurrencies.
So let's move on to what is happening out in North Korea. And we can see that there's a lot of propaganda going on about Kim Jong-un creating a missile, putting a nuclear warhead on there. And I wanted to get your take of what you think is happening out in North Korea. Do you think we're heading to war? Do you think this is a plan to go in and have regime change? What is your take on what's happening out in North Korea?
My guess is if they do anything, they'll do something like a blackout over North Korea, some kind of staged event where they have intel on the ground, and rather than invade or bomb or anything, this is just spy novel stuff, but they black out North Korea, the places. And it's not too hard to black out North Korea because probably the only person who has electricity is the president. But if they know where all the nuclear stuff is, they can secure that and they can take out the leadership through some type of action. I don't think they're going to use military to bomb the whole place because now you have the risk of them shooting off weapons. You have the risk of creating nuclear explosions in North Korea. I think if they're going to do anything, and the way Trump has been talking, I just don't see how anyone benefits from, quote, taking them out through military operation in the traditional sense. I think it would have to be some type of operation akin to the type they say how they took out bin Laden, but put aside that, some type of real intervention in the country where they can actually secure. Again, that's just I don't know much about it, and I may be talking nonsense, but that's my view. If anything happens, it's going to be not an invasion or a bombing. It's going to be some type of event they can somehow get in there. CIA stuff, I don't know.
Do you think they're using that to cover up the problems with the economy? You think they're trying to go in and have some type of an event to cover up, everything that's been going on?
Yeah, there's always some type of event they use to cover up. There's also a type of event, even not just to cover up, just to keep you focused. Like they're important, your life matters based on what they do. So let's make sure he does the right thing, or let's take a side against him, or let's take a side for him. Now you're in the game. Now you're paying attention to what they do. And then, as you say, if you're paying attention to what they do, you're not paying attention, perhaps how bad the economy is.
Where do you think the economy is going? Do you think we're just going to chug along the way we are, or do you think the real economy is going to, force the fake economy to implode?
I think that the real economy is under the boot of the fake economy so much that you'd have to have some type of big event and you'd have to have something happen, because otherwise if they maintain control over the economy, you will have this real economy just plod along, slow down even more. Because remember, even in China, there's a limit to how many ghost cities you can build to boost GDP. There's a diminishing return every time you borrow money to make economic stimulus. And basically, now they're stimulating to stand still, and eventually they're going to be stimulating. That's why they have negative interest rates. It doesn't work after a while. Even Keynes said that the stimulus, the monetary, the fiscal stimulus you're only supposed to run a deficit for a short period of time. And then once you manage to smooth out the economy, you're supposed to then leave the economy alone and allow a surplus but we haven't had surpluses in decades. We're on permanent borrow. And that is the problem. They have normalized QE across the world. Every country does it. All the European Union does it. Japan does it. They've normalized low interest rates. Now they're pretending that they're going to raise interest rates and let the balance sheet run off. But when the United States lets the balance sheet run off, that just means that European banks and Japan will probably just buy more treasuries to make up for the ones that the Fed is not reinvesting in. That's the problem right now, is that the entire global economy is run through central banks, which are all connected to the IMF. There's not this rogue concept that China is going to do anything to upset the whole world order just to raise the gold price. That's my view.
Louis, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work?
Oh, you just go to smallgold.com. You can follow me on Twitter at smallgold. And there's a smallgold BitChute channel, a smallgold VidMe channel. And yes, there's also a smallgold channel on that other thing owned by Google.
All right. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being on the X22 Report Spotlight.